It's time for the Midwest Sheep and Goat Market Report here on the Rural Radio Network. I'm Clay Patton. Thanks so much for coming back. As we're back in after a brief week hiatus, apologies there, a little time crunch. We just didn't have time to quite produce the report and the accuracy and quality that it needed, but your week's wait is going to be well rewarded as we have a lot of data and information to get down to, especially when it comes to imports and exports, namely looking to the U.S.'s largest competitor for sheep and goats, that being Australia. So buckle in. Let's take a look here through the Midwest Sheep and Goat Market Report for the week ending November 11th. I'm going to call the sheep market $20 to $25 higher, especially on prime slaughter and feeder lambs. The goat market, though, we are seeing more quotes over $400. It's kind of exciting to see. We're getting back to some of those numbers. However, there were plenty of softer quotes, some of them even under that $200 100-weight mark. So, and those were more on the heavy withers as well as some of those heavier kid goats getting up towards that 70, 85 pound mark. So I'm not going to call the market there. I'm going to call it steady with higher undertones. Going to try and look over some of those, but I just can't get on some of those bottom end numbers to really want to call this market aggressively higher. The lamb market, though, it is strongly higher coming back this week. At trickled down, that gave some support over into the coal ewes, the coal rams as well. So really good to see, though, that general trend. Now, the squawk, and I saw it on several social media discussion threads. It was a national headline story here in the U.S. from large news outlets, is the fact that the Australian sheep market is really taking a battering here over the past year. Going through and reading through several of them, a lot of them attributing to an aggressive growth. We've seen the weather cycles fluctuate more towards La Nina, which, as we know, unfortunately here, the 22 drought, which has lingered for many of us into 2023. The fact that things were dry here, but a La Nina friendly to Australia producers. They saw a nice rebound in their pasture and their forage, so they've brought in a lot more grazing. They retained on the herd side, and supposedly, according to Australian ag officials, they grew up their sheep herd nationally about 23%. So pretty aggressive growth coming back there. Now, unfortunately, the growth is coming at the expense of the market. Their prime slaughter lambs down about 40% year over year and through October. The coal stock, though, dropping as much as 80%. Rumors, there was no hard conference of it, but some even looking at maybe artificially destroying their herds, not artificially, but just having to do some herd destruction just to try and kind of hold things together. Unfortunately, we are moving into a La Nina pattern, or a El Nino pattern, which is more friendly here to U.S. in terms of weather patterns. Unfortunately, still plenty of drought out there. But looking at Australia, also things starting to dry up for them. So that's not a positive there, especially when now they're dealing with some overbought prices. So kind of going back through this, a lot of people concerned. We've got a strong dollar. We can buy a lot of cheap Australian lamb right now. Will they import? Will their product take away the current market we see right now in our lamb market, which really has been pretty steady, pretty solid, and higher from what it was a year ago. So it's been really a decent lamb market that we've seen here over a while. So my first thought, too, I thought, well, maybe Australia lost a customer. There's been some trade spats between the U.S. or between China and Australia, and sometimes their ag products come at the cost of that. However, according to Sheep Central, now this is a publication by Australia's sheep industry, they actually noted that August, they saw one of their largest months of export for lamb and mutton leaving Australia, and one of their fastest growing markets was Asia, China being the center one of that. China is a large consumer of mutton here in the global economy. So that kind of goes back away from there. Maybe they've seen some recent fall-offs, but coming into the latter part of 2023, it looked like their export market was pretty aggressive and growing as they were hitting some record numbers as well. So now Sheep Central also reported that they had suspected prices for American lamb exports had bottomed in August into September as well. And so they were actually hoping to see maybe a little more product move here into the U.S. According to USDA data, though, which we'll get to in a second, doesn't maybe look like that quite came to fruition. So maybe they've got some internal issues going on, some supply chains or something that they haven't quite got resolved, or some other bubbles that have occurred back in the system. But there doesn't seem to be a clear forerunner of where it is unless they've lost domestic demand, which is possible. I'm going to talk about a debt bubble here in the U.S. that has me a little concerned from that perspective as well. First, though, let's look at the import data. Are we importing Australian lamb at the detriment of our own producers? Well, when you're looking at USDA data that's coming out from the export service, or rather the ag marketing service wing of USDA, just Google U.S. lamb exports. It's a pretty easy Excel file to download and take a look at for yourself. But we're looking at 22 to 2023 data, and what we see is the U.S. is overall importing less lamb, and they're importing less, namely from Australia. The Australian, of course, they already had most of the imports anyway. They've taken the brunt of that loss. In September 2022, the U.S. imported 19.4 million pounds from Australia and 4 million pounds from New Zealand. Now, for a total of 23.4 million pounds. Flash forward to this year, September 2023, the U.S. imported 16.4 million pounds from Australia, down about 3 million, and imported actually a slight increase from New Zealand of about 4.2 million pounds, up about 200,000 pounds. Total, though, was only 20.6 million pounds, still net loss of about 3 million pounds month over month. And now I highlight September, but we could go through and ear pick more of these. September is just the most recent data they have. But you see this general trend as we see a little uptick in imports from New Zealand, but in overall we see a downtrend in Australia. And again, Australia's got the market share. We just continue to trim and just kind of scrape layers back on what we're importing from Australia. So overall, we are seeing total less lamb imports here into the U.S. Now, can't completely explain that. We have a strong U.S. dollar. That typically makes us more aggressive being able to purchase global products, import them cheaper because our currency can go out there and buy more. Here's when you look at everything, though, coming through it, we see, though, that maybe it's just an overall quality prospect coming in here because the U.S. lamb market is holding more current. Our carcass weights are down. Our live lamb weights are down from where they were a year ago. We're holding steady week over week with minute differences. Overall, we're up nearly 4% on lamb slaughter this year. So we're finding a home for this domestic product. We're not seeing it grow in the commercial cold stocks either. On the lamb side, we've held right in kind of that sweet spot of 23 million. Now, remember, prior to the pandemic, we were at 40, 50 million pounds in cold storage. Now we're post-pandemic. We're back close to that 23, 24, 22 to 23 million pounds, getting up there at times close to 24, 25. But again, overall, we're finding a home for U.S. lamb. So maybe we're feeding our own domestic market and maybe a higher lamb quality is something that is starting to catch consumers. Now, I think the biggest headwind for all proteins could be a looming consumer debt bubble. The Federal Reserve in New York this past week reported credit card debt in the U.S. topped $1.08 trillion. I don't know when, I don't know how that debt bubble burst, but that seems to be a concern. That's an all-time record for U.S. consumer credit card debt. So people are trying to live with inflation. They're trying to do it, but they're financing a lot of it synthetically through credit cards. If and when that consumer bubble breaks, does it something that goes against all proteins here in the industry? Something to keep in mind. Let's go ahead and break down. If you want the holidays, we've included those in the last several reports. I have in the written portion of this commentary too. Check it all out, ruralradionetwork.com. Nothing too big or looming. We've got Hanukkah coming up in December, and then we go into 2024 holidays. Now, for some highlighted quotes out here this week, we'll go to Colby, Kansas. Colby Livestock, 10 head of 65-pound kid goats sold for $318 a hundredweight. That's $207 a head. Colby also sold 22 head of 55-pound hair lambs for $235 a hundredweight, or $129 a head. Centennial Livestock in Colorado sold 70 head of 112-pound slaughter wool lambs for $218 a hundredweight, or $244 a head. Upper end of that draft brought $232.50 a hundredweight, or $260 a head. Centennial also sold 30 head of 105-pound goat withers for $234 a hundredweight, or $246 a head. Upper end of the draft brought $247 a hundredweight, or $260 a head. Kelowna, Iowa sold 9 head of wool lambs for $284 a hundredweight, or $210 a head. Upper end of that draft brought $310 a hundredweight, or $229 a head. Kelowna, Iowa also sold 69 head of hair lambs weighing 74 pounds for $220 a hundredweight, or $163 a head. Upper end of the draft brought $229 a hundredweight, or $169 a head. Sioux Falls Regional Livestock sold 997 head of 134-pound slaughter wool lambs for $187 a hundredweight, or $250 a head. Upper end of the draft brought $191 a hundredweight, or $256 a head. Sioux Falls also sold 84 head of 53-pound goats for $267 a hundredweight, or $141.50 a head. The upper end of the draft brought $300 a hundredweight, $159 a head. Producers Livestock in Texas sold 211 head of 74-pound feeder hair lambs for $242 a hundredweight, $179 a head. Upper end of the draft brought $255 a hundredweight, or $185 a head. Producers also sold 264 head of 54-pound goats for $318 a hundredweight, $172 a head average. Upper end of the draft sold for $355 a hundredweight, or $192 a head. Lamb slaughter this week, 38,000 head through Saturday. That was 2,000 head more than what we saw last week, and up 1,000 from last year. Year-to-date lamb slaughter is now 1.565 million head, 3.8% or 57,000 head more than the prior year's lamb slaughter. Live lamb weights this week, 119 pounds live, an increase of 1 pound from last week and a decrease of 9 pounds from last year. Dressed lamb weights were 60 pounds. That was unchanged from last week and down 5 pounds from last year. Here's your regional price breakdown on the wool lambs. Not enough for a trend on the 20 to 40 pounders. 40 to 70 pound wool lambs, $200 to $370 a hundredweight. 70 pounds and up, $170 to $310 a hundredweight. Hair lambs, 20 to 40 pounders, $200 to $360 a hundredweight. 40 to 70 pounders, $190 to $345 a hundredweight. 70 pounds and up, $150 to $250 a hundredweight. On the wool ewes, stocker ewes, not enough for an applicable trend. Slaughter ewes were $30 to $160 a hundredweight. On the rams, $77 to $142.50 a hundredweight. On the hair ewes, replacement quality, not enough for an applicable trend. On the slaughter hair ewes, $30 to $125 a hundredweight. To the hair rams, $85 to $162.50 a hundredweight. Kid goats, 20 to 40 pounds, $150 to $420 a hundredweight. 40 to 70 pound kid goats at $150 to $340 a hundredweight. 70 pounds and up, $180 to $419 a hundredweight. On the withers, 70 pounds and up, $190 to $290 a hundredweight. On the slaughter does, medium to fleshy, $110 to $205 a head. And on the slaughter bucks, $75 to $254 a hundredweight. That is our Midwest Sheep and Goat Market Report. Have a great rest of your day whenever you're listening to this, and I hope again to talk to you next week.